What if some invasive species are good? Welcome back to another video. Now today I've got a different sort of a video for you. We're going to talk about invasive species and how climate change will impact on invasive species. But it'll be different in the form of, it'll be more conjecture and opinion. And it's entirely based on this webinar I attended last week on invasive species and climate change that was done by SIEM, which for those of you who don't know is like the ecological body and environmental science body professionals have to be a member of, basically. SIEM stands for the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. But before we get into that, just a quick update on how the channel is going and things. So we now have 2,000 followers on our TikTok, which is insane. Like we hit 1,800 there last night, and I went to bed and I woke up and we hit 2,000 followers, which was madness really. Let's get into today's video, invasive species and how climate change can impact them. So before we start talking about invasive species and climate change, we should narrow down what an invasive species is. An invasive species is an introduced organism that negatively affects the ecosystem. So in Ireland we have several invasive species, such as, you know, the iconic Japanese knotweed, giant hogweed, Himalayan balsam, grey squirrel, and a few other things, zebra mussel, and a few, there's loads really. But with climate change, invasive species and the spread of invasive species are going to become more prevalent. So the idea that this webinar went into was, what if not all invasive species are negatively bad? Or more so, which invasive species are so catastrophic really for the environment that we should like focus our attention on them, and the lesser invasive or the lesser like catastrophic invasive species should be kind of like let go and accepted. With all of this, it's kind of hard to gauge how bad or good a species can be. You know, for example, we have some non-native species in Ireland, such as like the sycamore tree, which, you know, while it doesn't support as many insects or whatever as, say, oak, sycamores are very good at growing, and they're very good, and they have reforested so many areas in Ireland. Now, fair enough, there are plans, and rightly so, to reduce the amount of sycamores and replace them with native species now, which is great. 100% we do that. Sycamores pretty much acted as pioneers really in, say, like waste ground or farmland as very fast growing trees. And now now we can look at it and we're like, right, look, we have sycamores here, we should replace them with oak and alder and, you know, birch, depending on where and the soil and all that, what's best for it. And also, you know, you have a hawthorn, and look, there's so many important native tree species that we can plant. But the point is, sycamore took the step, and sycamore isn't necessarily adversely affecting the environment. But now we can decide, right, look, trees are good, we want trees here, excellent, but we're going to cut the sycamore out of here and we're going to replace it with, say, oak. And then we have a native like forest or native tree species, at least in that area, which is good. So I think this is like the idea. You know, we take for example like Japanese knotweed spread. It's spread by humans and human activities. It's increased like something like 500% in the last 7 years in the UK. So it's becoming a problem, and you take into account of, you know, the money goes into tackling Japanese knotweed after it's arrived, after it started to grow, maybe it was accidentally cut. That's where the money goes to. But the money, realistically, by, say, the councils or whatever, should be going into biosecurity to stop it from getting to the place first, rather than, okay, it's here, now we need to tackle it. So biosecurity, and there is a big move for this now in ecology and environmental science. Biosecurity, obviously it's been around for a while now, but to build in biosecurity in with, say, health and safety and risk assessments. But biosecurity is hard, and a lot of the times maybe people carrying out biosecurity, the funding isn't there. A very good point brought up in the webinar actually was that, okay, John down the road can use biosecurity for say 10 grand, but John down the road, while he might be very good at his job, but for 10 grand might be cheap. Whereas you want someone professional, some biosecurity company, or someone that specializes in biosecurity offering the same package for 15 grand, but that's an extra 5 grand. It's so much more. And when you're putting something like this out for tender, and you want to pick up the best option for the best value, you're going to pick John for 10 grand. But John for 10 grand might leave a stream of Japanese knotweed all along your road, and you're going to spend the next 5 to 7 years treating this Japanese knotweed, costing you an absolute fortune, because it costs you an extra 10 grand on top of it. Whereas if you went for the 5 grand option originally, it would have been done secure and properly. Now, and also the thing is, there is admin issues itself in treating of invasive species, and I'm sticking with plants on this case again. But so there's this idea of rapid response, and rapid response is, okay, we see it, it can now be sprayed, it can now be treated, it can now be cut, whatever. Obviously you're not cutting Japanese knotweed, but depending on the species, different treatments. And rapid response is, okay, go in, get it done. But by the time, especially in like say councils and a lot of red tape and admin, allocating funding and all this, it could be 6 to 8 months down the road before your rapid response gets around to treating this. And at this stage, Pat down the road with the hedge cutter might have come along, cut straight through your say Japanese knotweed again. Some of the stems are after getting caught up into the actual hedge cutter. He moves along to Jim Flavin's field down the road. He starts cutting his hedge. These stems come out, and all of a sudden your lovely hedge, you might have had something like ivy or bindweed mixed in with meadowsweet and your briars, and now all of a sudden there's Japanese knotweed stems all along him, and next year he's going to have a big stand of Japanese knotweed. The point I'm trying to make is, yes, some invasive species are terrible, and I've even come across pros for Japanese knotweed, and such as you can eat Japanese knotweed, you can make wine from Japanese knotweed, they're good at stabilizing soil. So I've come across people wanting to plant Japanese knotweed and say like where soil erosion is prevalent. And also you have the good pollinator, like Japanese knotweed is very good for bees and honeybees. But still Japanese knotweed is not something we want. That is one of those that we need to tackle. In some cases though, some invasive species can be beneficial. Now, again, it kind of comes to the non-native versus invasive species, and what we really need is a sort of alert system. And I mean, in fairness, we have such a great team of biologists, botanists, nature specialists essentially, that as soon as something arrives into the country, we pretty much know about it. And what we need to do is we need to develop an alert system of, okay, right, this is incredibly invasive, it's going to destroy ecosystems, or this isn't so bad. Like off the top of my head, we have stuff like say the wild boar. That was an interesting one that came into Ireland. So the wild boar used to be native, and there are farms with wild boar in Ireland, growing especially for restaurants, or breeding, especially for restaurants and stuff. And for whatever reason, was it a family of them? I think there was a male, a female, and it was a three offspring were released in North Cork recently enough. And the idea is that they're invasive species, but the idea is they were once native to Ireland, but they were killed by us through overhunting and etc. And so they were in Ireland before, but now because our ecosystem isn't used to it, they're invasive. But ecosystems change and adapt all the time, and we're going to see a lot of this with climate change and how our ecosystems are going to have to change, because our existing plant and animals range may decrease incredibly. You may see animals that, say in Wexford for example, animals in Wexford may no longer be suitable to Wexford as it gets too hot. But then we're going to see the introduction of other species, say from the southwest of England or from northern France, come into Wexford, and they're going to spread because, you know, as our temperatures increase, our climates get more mild and hotter, we're going to have perfect habitat for them and ecosystems. So we're going to have a large scale ecosystem change. Right, so I'm not sure where the camera actually cut out there, but the point is we do need to develop a system to come up with which invasive species is good and which invasive species are not even good, but which invasive species is acceptable and which invasive species must be stopped at the earliest point. And then we need to work on tackling and stopping the spread of our current invasive species like Japanese knotweed, hogweed, because as climate change expands and becomes more and more prevalent in our world, our own native species range will decline in most cases. And as I was kind of saying, something that's native to Wexford now will start retreating up the country, and something from, say, Western England or Northern France or even Spain might start coming into Wexford and might find itself at home. So we need to have a system that can decide whether or not we should leave this species take hold and whether or not it's beneficial. Because as the book The New Wild World goes into, invasive species have a large role to play in the survival and the continuance of nature, because essentially as climate gets hotter, then we're going to have a large scale ecosystem shift. So we need to have these plants and animals in the country in some regard to keep the ecosystem going and alive, even if that means changing our normal ecosystem, what we've been used to. And like I said, ecosystem changes all the time. That's why you have pioneer plants like I mentioned, say the sycamore tree, which came in and grew, but now we want to replace it with native species, and that's fine, and we can do that 100%, but the sycamore tree is the reason that there might be trees in the area in the first place, and now we want to change it, and that's fine. And we could do something similar with some of these more non-native invasive or invasive plants. We just have to see where it goes. And look, that was a different sort of a video from what I normally do. Normally I like to come out with facts and figures and be very sciencey and professional, whereas this one is more of opening up the idea for people. And look, most people, I know a lot of people won't see this video anyway, but I will link the SIEM conference when it is uploaded onto our YouTube page. It hasn't been uploaded yet, but when it does, it will be in the description below. Anyway, that will pretty much do for this video, guys. My next video is going to be an ecologist reacts to Clarkson's farm. Essentially, I just watched the episode 4, I think it was, on wilding, and you know, there were some really like interesting points he brought up, and obviously some terrible practices he had, and just gonna have a little reacting to that, and I think it'd be kind of cool to do. Anyway, look, if you haven't checked out my TikTok already, the link will be in the description. I now also have a Patreon page, just if you want to support me, you can sign up to it. There's 2 tier members. There's €2 a month and a €5 a month. I mean, they're pretty cheap if you want to support me, and with the €5 a month you get to recommend what YouTube video I do next, so that'd be kind of cool to check out. And that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll catch you next time.